from Miller Hall. I've got a huge cup of tea prepared, and I'm excited for what I know is going to be a really engaging conversation. I want to give a shout out to our many students who are joining us tonight. Thanks for making time in the midst of a very busy semester to hop on Zoom yet again. But this is going to be a good conversation. I've met with Alison several times to talk about this content. This is something she's passionate about, and there's a lot we can learn from her. So, Alison, you ready?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. It's exciting to be here. I appreciate the opportunity. I miss being on campus, though. I'm on campus regularly when we're not in a pandemic. So I'm glad that I can communicate with students and talk to you, even if I can't be there in person.
And as soon as the world gets back to normal, please come on back. Let's kick off.
Right?
Oh, go ahead.
No, hopefully the spring. Hopefully.
Fingers crossed, fingers crossed. But until then, we keep on keeping on. Let's talk about the soft skills, Alison. So that's our topic tonight. That's what we're here to discuss, is the soft skills. That term tends to be one of those buzzwords that we hear, and it's become a little bit of a thought-terminating cliche. We've heard it so many times that we don't fully understand exactly what it means or doesn't mean. So before we really dive in, Alison, as someone with an extensive background in the industry, can you tell me what that term means to you and how those soft skills find their way into everyday professional practice?
Yeah, you're right. It can be kind of a thought-ending cliche. I like how you put that. It's harsh, but it's true though. I mean, so soft skills are something that can be hard to pin down, like a je ne sais quoi. I used to be told by leadership partners that I had an it quality, something about me that exuded confidence and competence that I was good at. And I think it exists in a lot of different forms. I think public speaking is a big part of that, but public speaking not just before a large audience, like in an auditorium, but public speaking in a meeting with a client, when you're delivering the required audit committee communications to the audit committee of the board of directors. If you're leading an internal team meeting, you're teaching training, just the way that you present yourself is a big part of these soft skills. I think it's being friendly. I think it's being prepared before you arrive, being prepared for all of the communications, whether it's an email or if it's a memo or if it's a public speaking type event. Those are because public speaking and the way that you present yourself and these soft skills exist at all times, and you're being evaluated for them at all times in your career, whether you're aware of that or not. And so being aware of it, I think is a big step towards being really good at it. If you're aware of it and you're preparing for it and you're thinking about it and anticipating it, you're far better to come across very strongly.
And that it factor, I think, is so important, and it's hard to talk about that because it's hard to develop it. But you mentioned two things. One is competence and one is confidence. And when you marry those two things together with your character, that's really the formula for credibility. So that it factor has everything to do with your credibility and you becoming the person that I think people call upon when it's time to step up and meet a challenge or find an opportunity or to go to the next mile in the organizational sequence. You become that person because you've demonstrated that credibility. You talk a little bit about public speaking here, and that's one of those like big, scary things. Accountants specifically are not known, I think, for their love of public speaking. And I think that's true for most every professional. You've been described by faculty in our programs here as one of the best communicators they've ever seen. So one of the things that strikes me most is that you can't actually often teach those skills in the classroom. They're developed over time. How have you developed those communication skills over time and perfected them? And also, I want to tag on another question too, if I can. What role do you think communication has played as you moved throughout your career? That's a big question.
It is. So I think, because I've heard that, one of you all mentioned that to me this week, that you all viewed me as a good communicator, excellent communicator. And I spent some time thinking about that. I think there's two elements, in my view, that I think have made me a good communicator. One is I'm prepared for every communication that I have to deliver. If it's an audit, even if it's something mundane like an audit update email that goes to the audit partner, I'm prepared and I understand the update and the status that I need to deliver, and I make sure that it's clear, that it's concise, it's timely, it's useful, so I'm prepared. So in the public speaking, what you mentioned, it's knowing the material such that you could give that presentation in your sleep. And all of the preparation, the hours and hours and hours that it takes to prepare for that and practice it are worth it, because what you're doing is you're preparing for the task at hand. The task at hand is and delivering the message, whether it's an email, if it's a memo to the audit work papers, or if it's a presentation to a large audience, you're prepared. But the other piece of that is, beyond just being prepared, is pulling your head out of the details of what you're preparing for in the presentation and thinking about what you're communicating at a much bigger and broader level. What else is going on at the firm? How does this fit in to that? What else is going on at this client? What's going on economically in this client's industry? So it's pulling your head out of the details and understanding the bigger vision of what it is that you're communicating. And that's played a really big role in ways, when I look back on my career at KPMG and how I got the opportunities that I got and how I got into the positions that I got. One of the most exciting things that I got to do was I was among 5 leaders that headed up the deployment of KPMG's first paperless software. So when KPMG made the transition from, all of our work papers have always been prepared electronically, but ultimately the way that we stored those work papers and evidenced sign off was they got printed and put in a hard binder. And then we went completely paperless. And so 4 or 5 of us, maybe 6, were a part of this team that headed up that deployment for the entire US firm. And that was a very big role. Every single thing that we did was rooted in communications. And I think the way that I got identified for that was 2 things. One, I had gotten an opportunity to do a short-term rotation in New York related to the development of this software. And I went out of my way to be friendly, to get to know my colleagues, go to lunch with them, grab a cup of coffee with them. And then when I went back to my home office in Richmond, I stayed in touch. I would come up with a reason, even if it was just once a year, to stay in touch, send them a message. I saw your name in this article online. Congratulations on that. I haven't heard from you in a while. How are things going up there? Very low key, but in staying in touch, that made me a natural choice to be a part of the pilot program. The second part of this, Phil, that gets to the communications piece of this and even thinking bigger and how I think I distinguished myself from my peers, is we had to teach the training for this software when it was brand new to the senior managers and to the partners, to everybody at the firm, all the way to the other end of the spectrum with interns. And the task at hand, the item that I'm going to prepare for, is to teach the training, which is, where are all the little buttons? Where's the functionality in here? How does it work? So that's just the task at hand. They've got to walk out of the room understanding how to use this software. But I viewed my job in teaching that training as far bigger than that, because we're not training them on the software that they're going to use it tomorrow, because we're, obviously trainings at these firms happen far in advance. So I felt like the bigger task was, I understood where the firm was going, where KPMG's vision was, and why this software was important, and how it was going to make everybody's lives, their work lives, so much easier. And I needed to get everybody in that classroom to understand that and to agree with me and think, you're right, oh my gosh, and becoming unglued with excitement that, oh, wait, I'm not gonna have to deal with any of this drama that I've been dealing with in the past. All of this is gonna go away. Yes, there's pressure points with change. There's a learning curve and glitches are gonna happen. But if I could get them bought in to how exciting this was, that achieved a much bigger goal, because now they're going to go home excited about it. They're going to talk around their local offices excited about it. When their leadership asks them about it, they're going to be excited. And that just that puts the framework in their head that if a glitch happens or if something goes awry, they're just going to roll with it, versus throw their hands up and say, well, gosh, this glitch happened. And that's huge for KPMG as a firm. So I really thought bigger about what we were trying to achieve in that training. So I was prepared to teach the materials, and I put a lot of hours in that, but I thought a lot bigger about that and made sure that the participants in my classroom went back to their home offices.
I really like that, because it shows 2 things to me. Number one, it shows that the soft skills, they're not just sort of like a little sprinkle of something extra that's nice, but there's sort of an insurance policy. I mean, there's something that you stack away for a rainy day. So those endeavors of reaching out to colleagues to facilitate those connections, to be exceptionally clear, to keep doing the extra work that may not be required, but is nice and leads you one step further, it's going to help you when those significant problems arise. But also in that example, there's another point here, which is, it's not just about communication. I mean, the ability to take all of that complicated information and lead through change that involves some other skill too. It's not just communication, it's the ability to read the room and figure out what's going on interpersonally, or to critically think and take all of these moving parts and boil them down to their most essential elements. So you've shared a little bit about one example. Can you share more on specific encounters you've faced where the soft skills, not just communication, really helped you in ways that you might not have anticipated when you were sitting in that chair in Miller Hall in the MAcc program, or even in the first few years of the professional practice? What observations do you have as somebody who's been at this a little bit longer than some of us, that for the value of soft skills?
There's something I wish I had done a better job at this earlier in my career, and so hopefully this will serve as an important point for the students that are listening. You're being evaluated at all times in your career, whether it's just conversations in the audit room, if it's emailing an update to somebody, if it's running a team meeting, if it's participating in a local office event or a meeting, you are being evaluated. And what I mean is, the more often that you're prepared for events, the more often that you know the material and that you're demonstrating confidence, the more often you're building a relationship and a rapport with everybody else on that audit team, with people who report up to you and the people that you report to. And that's going to come across like your clients and your superiors are going to view you as somebody that they can count on. That, oh, so Allison's on time. Allison is prepared for this meeting. She understands this material. She's communicated it to me in a way that's clear, that's concise, it's not confusing. She's anticipated what my questions are going to be. She's anticipated what my reactions may be, and she's prepared for it. The more often that you do that, the more that you're building up. I liked how you put that earlier, like dividends, or that you're building up this asset that's a big part of your career that is going to pay dividends in the future that you can't even anticipate. You'll impress enough people and impress the right people that an opportunity is going to come your way later on. It might even be 2-3 years down the road, because the time lag between I was going out of my way to be friendly in New York and make some friends, and understand, well, what is it that the firm is doing, and what are the details, and what are some of the functionalities, and just the work that I did then paid dividends 3 years later in a way that I could not have anticipated that I would have had that level of a national role over something for the whole US firm, which at the time, and probably still is, they said was the biggest change in the history of the audit practice at KPMG.
That's so impressive. So those skills, of course, broadly speaking, set us up for the future. And I think that leads to a nice new theme, which is where we want to take the conversation next, which is on agility. So you've shared some great examples from your time at KPMG and throughout your career. But as we progress tonight, I wanted to ask not just about the past, but the future. And one of the things that the soft skills can do is help us to develop agility and pivot and adapt. And there's a lot of adaptation sort of going on right now, given the realities of the COVID-19 situation that we all live in. We know that no industry is exempt. So how do you think the soft skills can equip us to not only navigate this time, but really like thrive in it while we wait for the world to get back to normal? Any tips or thoughts?
Yeah, I think a big part of that is keeping your head up high at a high level and not down in the weeds. Because with the pandemic, everything changed. I mean, things went online that had never been online before. The way the audits are being done are completely different from the way that they've been done in the past, as far as virtually. They're not, the audit teams are not out at the client site; they can't be there. So maintaining in your mind a big picture is really, really important. So you're more likely to come at something with a positive attitude. That this is something the pandemic happened. There's no way around it. KPMG was going paperless. We were not going to be clinging to binders into the 21st century as any further than we needed to. And it's amazing how many people can be averse to change. And that's natural. We like what we're used to. We like what we're comfortable with, and we don't want to go through the change. But if you can maintain a positive attitude, if you're in a career that you're passionate about, and that you understand its importance, you can maintain a high level view of what it is that you're doing and what your overall importance of this is, such that the elements of change, like with things going online and everybody doing a lot more over Zoom than they used to, just almost you can reduce that down to almost a level of just white noise, and you'll be able to navigate through the challenges a lot better if you're maintaining that high level view. And a positive attitude goes a long way. And that's why when we were making that huge shift, it was huge, that I needed everybody to understand how positive this was going to be. So one of the things or the tricks that I did when I taught the training was I told a lot of stories about how this was going to change them. So the review note functionality is a fun example. So in review notes in the past in audits, that happened a number of different ways. Somebody might write down, so review notes mean just somebody reviews the work papers and they have some questions or things they want you to look into more. So it's just a kind of a to-do list. So some people hand wrote those out on a notepad and handed it to you. Some people typed it up and hit print and handed it to you. Some typed it up and emailed it to you. So it was just this discombobulated way that you as the senior and the manager had to keep up with all of that and all of the different ways that people did that. Some might just type it in an email and just hit send, and it's not even in a Word document. But once we were in this software, all of it was electronic. It was this database. You could sort it, filter it by status, who left it, date, area, and nothing gets CPAs, few things get CPAs more excited than a database that you can filter and you've got all access to all this data. So I would use stories where things had gone awry. I had a manager once, she liked to leave all of her review notes in pen on a notepad. And whoopsie, happened in the audit room, somebody spilled a glass of water on the notepad, and it was just like watching a scene with invisible ink. That all those review notes just started to drip down the page. And I had to call her and explain that we didn't have that anymore, that she was gonna have to, we were gonna have to recreate that, which was not a pleasant conversation, but those things didn't happen anymore in this paperless world. So I paid attention to the language that I used. So when I was highlighting how great this was going to be, I used positive language like, this is going to be faster, it's going to be easier, it's online, accessibility is going to be better. And when I was contrasting that with all the drama that they're putting up with now, I tried to use language like slow, awkward, cumbersome, just to try to highlight there's a lot of drama you're already putting up with right now in this paper world that's going to go away. So that the pain points and pressure points of change don't have to be incremental, but there's going to be elements, like the commuting one comes up a lot, especially people who live in the big cities like where I used to work in Dallas. They're not having to commute an hour every morning and an hour back, so they've regained 2 hours every day. Little things like that. So yes, there's some pain points with doing something that's new, but keeping your mind focused on the big picture helps with that and maintaining a positive attitude.
And I think that's so key. Those soft skills are sort of the vehicle we use to take our technical deliverables and then match them to those quality metrics or outputs that we're trying to achieve. Excellence, clarity, efficiency, things that are also really hard to define, but those soft skills are going to allow you to connect the technical to the outcome. I think that's so crucial. You mentioned storytelling, and I do want to get there. And as we move forward in the webinar, I want to note anybody that's watching, please feel free to start asking questions at any time. So we're going to keep that sort of informal, and it might be a little messy or clunky, but this is a great opportunity to engage with an alum who has been there, somebody who has put the MAcc degree to practice. And so if you've got questions, feel free to start submitting those. We together are going to sort through, and we'll make sure that we get through as many questions as possible tonight. But Alison, I've got another one for you. One of the things that we teach our students here is that the soft skills aren't necessarily the key to getting a job, and they're not necessarily the key to even getting a better job. The soft skills largely come into focus, and their importance is realized often mid-career when we have a crisis or sort of just a moment where we freak out and we say, I need to make a pivot, I need to move in a different direction. And I think few people fail to realize how manipulative an accounting degree is and how many things you can do with it. You are a great example of that, and you're now working on this very interesting project that actually has little to nothing to do with accounting at all. I wonder, can you share just a little bit about that project with us and talk about how those soft skills equipped you to move into that really rewarding experience that you're working on right now?
I'm a big believer that people who have public accounting experience can do anything that they want to do. Accountants in general, even somebody coming out of corporate, can do what you want. The experience is world-class, and you're getting a world-class education at William & Mary that's going to prepare you for that. But then a career in public accounting exposes you to so many things and gets you so much varied experience that you can use in anything. So I learned I volunteered in a project at Swam Library on campus at William & Mary. It was an online project. I happened to be living in Texas, where they put their civil rights archive online. old, diaries, letters, and papers, and their Civil War archive online, and we're asking people to help transcribe it. So it's interesting that this was, this whole project for me was rooted in communication, because the documents that I was looking at are letters that were written over 150 years ago. And I focused on the Civil War papers because they were so old, and I was fascinated by that. And ultimately, I landed on the letters of one particular young woman. She was a teacher. She was a war refugee, so she was separated from her family. She lost her home, all of her belongings, and she was living among strangers as a refugee and as a teacher in Powhatan County, Virginia. And I began to research her, and then I found that the house that she'd been living in as this war refugee was still standing and is lived in today by a family. And I reached out to them thinking, oh my gosh, these letters, which are to me are just fascinating history, but oh my gosh, these letters represent a complete history of your house during the American Civil War and all the drama that went with it. And so I reached out to them, and of course they responded immediately. They had me out for a tour, and we sat down and had dinner together in the house. So I had 3 goals when I went. I think this came from my career. I understood I was going to be communicating with them on 3 levels. One was I put together a book with William and Mary's permission and gave them the scans of the original letters, so copies, and then copies of my transcription so they could actually read them. Otherwise, 19th century script handwriting is challenging. So I put all that together in a binder, but the binder must have been about like this thick. So, here's your homework. So better than that, so at another level, I prepared an executive summary, thinking ahead and anticipating how are they going to use this binder? How are they going to use this information? So probably they're going to have people, friends, family, neighbors, cousins come into the house who want to know about this. And I felt like if I could put together an executive summary that listed out kind of the best of, so troop movements in the area, some of the more exciting things that happened or scary, or descriptions of the house itself that I felt like the homeowner would be interested in. So I gave them an executive summary. So that's an important point. If you're ever communicating an enormous amount of information, do not show up with just all of this information in a giant file. You need to put together an executive summary and tell people these are your takeaways from this. And then the third piece was I knew verbally that I wanted to convey to him that he had hit the jackpot, that he lived in this historic home, and that these letters were left behind by this war refugee that described everything he'd ever want to know. If he ever wondered what those walls would say if they could talk, he was now going to find out. And so I got him bought in. He was so excited about who this young woman was and this project. And that was a really important point, because and I've done this with several other homes in this project and other historic sites, and everybody that has received one of these binders is excited. It's become like this small community of people that are all involved in this now. And I think that came, my big picture view of this and thinking about the broader implications of this project came out of my career, because it's the same in an audit. We have the detailed level of the audit work papers, and then there's the executive summary that goes to the audit committee that contains required communications. But then we're also showing up in person to deliver that orally. And that is something that I would practice at and go over and over and over to make sure that I nailed that presentation. But so that's an example of what I'm doing right now. And frankly, I run into a lot of retired CPAs in this. So there's something, the American history or history in general career and the CPA career have a lot in common, which is interesting to think about. But hopefully that answers your question.
It does. And it's super fascinating to me because it also demonstrates, I think, the agility and the malleability of the profession and how it can equip you to have a rewarding career in whatever avenue that leads you to. So you've included a lot of great stories, and much of your focus right now is on storytelling. And I wanted to talk on that theme. So many students think that the practice is sort of all about keeping your head down and running formulas and just doing the work, the technical side of things. But the world of work is complicated, right? Because it's filled with people, and people are complicated. And one thing that stories do is they allow us to sort of cut through the noise of the humanity or the humans in those professional encounters. As a master storyteller yourself, can you tell us just a little bit about, from your perspective, the role that stories play in the practice or in the professional world? How do they allow us to have more fulfilling or more clear professional lives?
Well, it's an important point. I think having empathy for the people that you're communicating with and working with is big. And I think storytelling naturally comes out of that. So if you can achieve having empathy with this client who might be about to hear some news that they don't want to hear, and empathize with that and be ready and anticipate that, that conversation, you'll do a better job of preparing for that conversation. I think this is what helped a lot when KPMG went through this massive transition from these paper binders to being completely electronic, which changed everything about what we did and how we did it. Storytelling helped people understand how this was going to change their life. Otherwise, their focus is just on, oh, I got to learn this tool now. Now I have to learn something that's new. What happens if there's a glitch? What happens if my laptop crashes now? I mean, all this stuff happens. What happens if my Wi-Fi goes down? So you don't want their heads getting too caught up in that. So storytelling and helping them understand, hey, if there's a snowstorm and all of you have to work from home for 2 or 3 days, which used to happen because busy season, and when the 10Ks are filed, that's February. And that's when Richmond used to just get hit with these snowstorms. And we had to get in our cars and figure out how we were going to get to the client side because we had to. I mean, we can't just throw our hands up and say a snow day. I mean, we are professionals. We're in the business of client service, and we have to get to that client side and get that audit done and get that audit opinion out. But when we went paperless, that made this infinitely easier. Instead of having to deal with that drama, you can log into your computer from home, from your kitchen table or your desk in your office, and just like what we're all doing now in the pandemic, and you can log right into the audit file and you can keep moving, and you're not going to lose any time and you're not going to lose any momentum, and you and your team can stay safe in a snowstorm. So helping them, telling stories can help them understand. It also can help when you're delivering bad news. So some of the more painful conversations I had to have was when I had to call an audit team who had a ticket open for a problem with their file, and I had to communicate that a large portion of their file is now lost. That something happened and there was an element of their audit file that now it's not really lost, they have backups, so they're going to have to revert to a backup. So they may have lost maybe 3 or 4 days of progress that they're going to have to go back and do. And those were the most difficult and painful conversations to have, because these are people. I did a good job in that role of staying rooted in what their experience was, and that distinguished me from my peers, that I understood this isn't just a phone call to tell them that something happened that made this portion of the file no longer appear and we can't get it back. I stayed rooted in the fact that these are team members. They've been working late, 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. It's busy season. They've been making sacrifices. They've been working weekends. They're tired. They're anxious, they're annoyed. And so if I could make that phone call, there were a couple things that I would bake into that ahead of time. Number one, I would assure them that I treated this like it was my own audit file. That if this happened to me, I would want to know everything that every level of IT support did to try to fix this. And I would communicate to that, because often when someone's hearing bad news, they're feeling shock and some anger and some anxiety. And if I would just try to keep talking in a very calm voice, these are all the things that we tried. We tried this, we tried that, we elevated it to this level, it went to global IT support, and here's what happened. And then explain very calmly what happened. But most importantly, give them a path out. Don't just, sorry about that. Give them a path out and say, okay, here's what you're going to do. You have a backup from 2 days ago. You're going to restore that backup. Likely, most of the files that were in the file that you've lost are probably on your computer. They're in your email. They're on your hard drive. You're going to be able to get those back, and recreating the work across the 2 days is going to go a lot faster because you're just recreating it. You've already done all of the heavy thinking and all the critical thinking that goes into that. You've already performed the procedures. This is just redocumenting it. And I would explain that from audit teams that have had this happen in the past, recreating it took a small fraction of the time. So just getting that, empathizing with them, sharing examples from what other audit teams had done, even going through examples of other things we had tried to do to get the files back, just to empathize with them helped a lot. And people were more likely, if they got a call from me, they were going to come away from that conversation feeling a lot better, not as anxious, sad still that they have to do that, but I think their frame of mind was better. And so I think empathy is big, and storytelling is naturally going to be born of that.
So in those examples, I'm left wondering, Alison, were you always that good? Or did you fail a few times, then you figured out what worked? And it really attaches or latches onto a question we have in the chat. So this is a good opportunity to say, again, if you've got questions, get them in, because we've got a few coming in already. So Elise, one of our MAcc students, graduating in 21, actually asks, is all of this stuff, did it require a conscious effort from you, or did it just feel sort of natural and logical because of the type of person you are?
I think, Elise, that's an important question. I was not always good at this. Earlier in my career, I was the type, Phil, that you mentioned. My head was down. I was just trying to get through the day. I mean, those were the Sarbanes-Oxley years. If I could cut myself some slack, those were the Sarbanes-Oxley implementation years where we were just overwhelmed. And I really wasn't thinking about how every communication I made, every emotion I demonstrated in the audit room was a reflection of me. Because that was the space that we were in, and we were so overwhelmed. So this was something that I started to learn to do a better job at for two reasons. One, I think just naturally maturing in your career and being put into some leadership roles, you start to think about things a little bit differently. I just wish I had done it sooner. So hopefully, Elise, you'll do that a lot sooner than I did. Also, just some feedback. I've been given feedback and I took that seriously. It was constructive feedback. And so that helped. I think also, Elise, I took advantage of every opportunity that came my way early. I mean, even if it was coming back to William & Mary to do recruiting, which the big four public accounting firms do, because that is low risk public speaking experience, because William & Mary is an environment that I'm comfortable with. I knew the faculty. Sometimes I still knew the students who were only a few years behind me. So I was naturally going to be comfortable in that environment. So it was low risk experience, low stakes, I guess, good experience. And then, when I got up into the higher level roles, because I had taken advantage of some really unique opportunities as I was moving along in my career, like as Phil said, I didn't just view my job as only an auditor. I went and I got an opportunity. Well, actually, I sought it out. I don't want to say I got it. I took the initiative to become a national instructor at KPMG, even though that's incremental work to what I was already doing, but that got me training on public speaking. One of the things that they put you through in national instructor training, I'm confident they do it today, they put you in a small group, a class with maybe 4 other students, maybe there's 5 of you total, they film you. And then everybody, you and your peers, watch yourself on video. So if you're one of these people who sways a lot, or if there's a word you use a lot, like, that boy, once you see it, that's a really good way to get that out of your own lexicon. So you're less likely to do that anymore. So I think naturally, as you become a leader, you start thinking differently. So I would encourage students to think at that leadership level earlier. Pay attention to what's going on in the news. Pay attention to what's happening politically, what's happening economically, and be thinking about how that impacts the audit. Because I think that keeps your head, you need to be in the weeds too. I don't want to discount that, but it does help keep your head up at a higher level. That's going to help you think about these challenges a little bit differently. And be thinking at that leader level and take advantage of the opportunities that come your way. Don't tell yourself, gosh, I'm too busy to go to William & Mary for recruiting. Go to William, find a way to make that happen and go to William & Mary to do recruiting, become a national instructor, take advantage of a short-term rotation. Because I'll be honest, when I got that opportunity to go to New York, it didn't sound like good news to me. I was going to be flying to New York every week. That sounds terrible. And I was a member of a fun sports league that I wanted to play sports in the spring with my friends, and I wasn't going to be able to do that. So I was going to be in New York every week. But it really wasn't that long. The 2 or 3 months went by pretty quickly, and that was probably the best decision I made in my career, was to go to New York for those 2 or 3 months and participate in that project, because it exposed me to things that I had never been exposed to before. And I got into the pilot program. So one of the ways I think that I did such an exceptional job at deploying the software and leading it was I was in the pilot, because I stayed in touch with those people who were in charge of this. So I found out just after I shot Nolan a message, he said, oh yeah, we're looking for 10 pilot teams on the planet. So maybe there were only 5 in the US. And here are the criteria. Well, I had an audit that met those criteria. And so I made a play to get into that pilot, even though I knew there was going to be pain with doing a pilot, because the software isn't completely vetted out. That's part of what we were going to be doing. But I sold myself to them and said, I meet the criteria. Here's how we meet the criteria. And you know me, I'm a known person to you. We already have a friendship and a relationship. So communicating with me about this is going to go a lot better. It's going to go a lot smoother. It's going to be easier. So, and they agreed. And I did that also from a leadership perspective. I understood that would be a big thing for me professionally, for that audit team, for that audit senior and the staff, because that was going to be big for their careers. And you've got to be looking to bring people up behind you as you're rising in your careers. And I thought it would be important for the Richmond office of KPMG that we would be one of the few offices that had a team in that pilot. And so that was my thinking in that. So I think, Elise, it's a long answer, but looking for opportunities, taking advantage of those, and working to stay empathetic with people that are in the field, because what can happen when people get to the national level is they forget what's going on in the trenches, if I can use that analogy, that what's happening and how hard that is and how difficult that is. And I worked hard to maintain, to stay rooted in that and to understand what everything we were doing was going to mean for the people that were in the field.
So this is such a good point, Alison, because the soft skills are not likely to be groomed in your comfort zone, right? It often involves stretching outside of those comfort zones. But if you do that, it's going to lead to more comfortable professional lives in the end. It's going to make conflict a lot more comfortable. It's going to make networking a lot more comfortable. It's going to make...
I never thought about that. That's true.
You know,
it's when you get out of your comfort zone.
When you stretch, it just makes it, you're a lot more agile, you're a lot more nimble to navigate those things in the future. So let's talk a little bit about the future. And this relates to another question we have in the chat. And I'm so glad that you brought up just the social realm that the profession exists within right now. Maybe as a sort of historian-minded person, you can answer this question well, but you mentioned politics and social life, and those things etch their way into the professional sphere because, again, those spheres are comprised of people. What tips do you have for young professionals specifically on how to navigate some of the interpersonal dynamics of people coming in from the complicated world that we live in, talking about anxiety from elections or political uncertainty, economic uncertainty, health uncertainty? It's a complicated time. How do we read the room and navigate those interpersonal spaces? You got any tips?
I do. I think that's a complicated question. It's a big question. Kindness matters. Being friendly matters. I always viewed that when I was, socializing, at least in a business capacity within the city of Richmond or the city of Dallas where I worked, I represented KPMG. I mean, that was a reality. So things that I said, the way that I treated people, the way that I interacted with them wasn't just a reflection on me, it was a reflection on the firm. And we are a firm I'm sorry, I'm not with KPMG anymore, but I'm still pretty loyal. That's a firm of people, and people hire people. And you in that field, you depend on other people having confidence in you and liking you and wanting to work with you to hire you so that you have a job and the other people in your office have a job. Because when you lose an audit client or don't win the engagement that you're going after, that's painful because that's lost revenue, and it's lost salary and it's lost experience for your audit team. So I think being mindful of the fact that you are going to represent your firm and your company, and I think is important. And that just gets back to being a nice person and being a kind person and an empathetic person is big, and kind of paying attention to some do's and don'ts, some topics to stay away from if you can. But that's also where being aware of what's happening is important, being well-read on it. I used to make everybody who worked for me, that there was a daily Richmond business email. Dallas had it too. That was an email that hit your inbox by about 8 a.m. And it was a summary of all of the business news for the city of Richmond and then for Virginia too. And then there would be a couple of national ones too. So I know that young people don't get the newspaper because a local newspaper anymore is very expensive, and it's getting more expensive every day because that industry is struggling. So I made sure that everybody got that email every day, and I asked them, please read that at least a few times a week so that you know what's going on, because socially, when a topic comes up, a good example for me was I was home in Arkansas, so you would think my guard would be down. My parents were having a cocktail party, and the topic of Sarbanes-Oxley came up. And there was a man there who was an executive at a large company in Little Rock, and he put me on the spot and wanted to know what were my views on Sarbanes-Oxley. This legislation was new. We were just beginning to implement it. So most public companies at that time, they were still in the process. So the audits really hadn't gotten started yet. But I, thank goodness, was well read. I understood what that legislation was. I understood KPMG's views on it, which were positive. This is reform that was necessary. We need to do this. This is the right thing, and we're going to do the right thing, and we're going to do it in the right way, because we believe that having the public trust is important, and that public trust is massively important because what we do supports the validity of the capital markets. And so I was able to handle that conversation well, even though I was still pretty young. I was maybe 2 or 3 years out of the MAcc program, so that's still a pretty young phase, but I was ready. and came across strongly and hope that paid dividends for KPMG Arkansas or KPMG Dallas.
That's excellent. So you showed up prepared, and that relates to a question we have in the chat. And for everybody listening, we do have time for a few more questions. There's no question too big or too small. Allison's ready. Go ahead and drop those questions in the chat. We'll synthesize them and ask them aloud. But one of our fellow MAcc students, Amma, has a great question here. What tips and tricks do you have when it comes to young professionals who are trying to always be prepared in the profession? What can they do to just be that person that's ready to roll? What can they do in their lives to situate them as such?
I think getting experience is big, and you can do that by, depending on, by volunteering in a local campus organization. When I was at the University of Arkansas in undergraduate school, I was a member of a couple of campus organizations where I had a leadership role, and that gave me experience to publicly speak in a way where the stakes were lower and the stress was lower. I mean, you still feel nervous, but I wasn't going to lose my job or not graduate based on how I did. So getting some low stakes experience is good. When you start your career, you can volunteer with organizations in your city and get experience. Having a leadership role with an outside organization will give you experience public speaking. If you can get opportunities to do that while you're still on campus, I guess it's over Zoom now, do that. Practice in front of a mirror. You'd be amazed at what you can pick up. Or now that we all have a smartphone in our pocket, you can film yourself giving a presentation, and you'll see and you'll spot things that you can correct. So I think the more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to be at it, and it's not going to make you nervous, because the main thing that's going to make you nervous in a public speaking environment, or going into an audit committee, or now you've got to go give a report to the audit partner, the main thing that's going to make you nervous, I think, is lack of preparation. And so whenever I start to feel nervous before an event, I'll stop and pause and ask myself, what piece of this am I not yet prepared for? There's clearly a piece that I'm not prepared for yet, and what is it? And then spend the time doing it, even if it takes until, in a couple of examples I can think of, even at William & Mary, until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning in front of the hotel room mirror, going over and over what I plan to say, because you'll thank yourself the next morning, even if you're a little sleepy, because you will have prepared. And so I think, the two things are, one, being prepared, which means just knowing the material. So if it's teaching or training, go over and over and over those materials until you know it. And if it's delivering the audit committee presentation to the board of directors, it's you've been through all of those materials multiple times, because that develops, I think, a muscle memory where you're more likely, even if something happens that throws you off guard, the fact that you've rehearsed it enough, it's not going to sound rehearsed, it's going to sound prepared. And then getting opportunities to practice it yourself is going to build your confidence and your ability to do that. I think smiling, looking friendly, speaking up, raising your voice a little bit, making sure you're not speaking too softly. I think voice and the projection of your voice helps.
That's good. Those are all tips for success. And we know that sometimes even best laid plans fall flat on their face.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we learn best through failure, and you've got quite an impressive career behind you, but I'm sure that there was some failure in the background too. So as our young professionals go and engage in the professional sphere and inevitably trip up, fail, drop the ball somewhere along the way, what advice from your career can you offer them on how to use that failure and maximize it, turning it into success, and how to recover when they do indeed drop the ball?
Yeah, I mean, you learn from those situations. My favorite example is really when you have those bad things happen to you, use them later. I mean, first of all, you're going to learn from it, but then when you're in a position of leadership and somebody has something bad happen, you're going to be able to go to that person with a lot of authenticity and be able to say, this happened to me too, and here's what I did. Here's how I addressed that. Some examples. So one I thought of as you were talking about or asking the question, I was on an audit where the client had struggled to get us documentation on time. So even though they always had a deadline, it was a private company, not publicly traded, I want to be clear. That deadline was never met because the client never could get us the information on time. Well, one year, so I think normally we issued that audit opinion like in September. Well, one year the client came to us and said, told the audit partner, you're going to issue this, I think in July. I don't even remember now, but it doesn't matter. But it was like 2 months earlier. So the audit partner came to the audit room and said, we're going to issue the audit opinion by July. And I was I was still a senior, so maybe 3 years out of the MAcc program. My reaction, I still remember to this day. I said, so how are we going to tell them that's not going to happen? I don't know how we're going to be able to pull that off. And the audit partner turned to me. So what I did unintentionally was I just set the tone for the audit team that this wasn't going to happen. Like, I just couldn't see it. And the audit partner turned and looked at me and said, "Don't you mean, how are we going to do this? How are we going to make this happen? Isn't that what you mean?" And I immediately felt convicted, like, oh, he's right. You know what? We're in the client service business. I was still young, so I'll acknowledge we don't all have this nailed from the beginning. And so when he looked back at me with a stern look and said, "Don't you mean, how are we going to do this?" I immediately realized, so we've got to pivot. To get back to one of your earlier points, Phil, we've got to pivot and figure out, if we're going to meet that deadline, what is it going to take? What documents are historically late? What meetings do we need to have with the client to communicate this, to make sure, if you want this July 31st deadline to be met, this is the documentation we have to have by these dates. And then talk to them about, so now that you understand that, how are you helping them figure out how are you going to do that? And what resources do you need? And are you talking to the right people to get those resources?
That's great. Great. Alison, you're a wealth of information and we really appreciate it. These are helpful. Those small stories that seemingly so inconsequential, they really are. They have good professional value because they help sort of set the stage for what's coming for, again, our young professionals entering the field. I want to be mindful of time, and we don't want to keep anybody on Zoom longer in our Zoom fatigued world than we need to. So I have one more question for you tonight, and it's sort of a big one. We're joined by many students who have tuned in to listen, some who might join us in the future, be a part of our MAcc program. As we prepare to wrap up what's been an incredibly insightful conversation, I'm wondering, can you share any final thoughts on the why factor? So why do the soft skills really matter, and why are they worth us taking time to develop? Can you charge us with their importance here?
It's really important because when you're using your soft skills every day at your company or at a client site or at a public event, you're doing two things. One is just the task at hand. You've got to deliver a message, a training material, a presentation. There's the task at hand that you need to do competently, and proper prior planning will prevent poor performance on that. I had a professor at Arkansas who just drilled that into us. I'm going to say it one more time for those that are taking notes. Proper prior planning prevents poor performance. So if you prepare, that's more likely to go well. But the other thing that I think is equally important, if not more so, is every single time you're doing that, you are establishing a relationship and a trust with the people with your audience, with those on the receiving end of that information. So they are learning to trust you, they're learning to depend on you, they're learning to have confidence in you, and they're more likely to think of you for an opportunity later on. You're going to be their go-to person. So when you're doing that, as you're having your interactions day to day, or if it's a big presentation to a large audience, you need to have that in mind and stay professional and stay positive and be conscious of how you're projecting yourself and how you're presenting yourself. So it's the two pieces. It's the preparation and it's the hard work that you do ahead of time, which sometimes that's incremental to your day job. So if your day job is getting this audit done, but you've volunteered to teach this local office training, that probably is going to mean you're working some more hours at night and on the weekends, and just embracing the fact that that's something that's going to be necessary to do for you to come across strongly to your local office. And then your local office is going to be impressed by that and think of you for opportunities later on. And that is going to take a lot of initiative too. So no one's going to come to you and tell you to do that. You're going to need to take the initiative to look for those opportunities and make the most of them as often as you can. And so preparation, and then just practice. I heard somebody say recently, Phil, I actually had this conversation about preparing for an event, and I gave the advice, you need to practice. And his response was, well, I don't want to sound rehearsed. Okay, you're not going to sound rehearsed because you're not reading it. That sounds rehearsed, but you will have practiced it to the point that it's just going to roll off for you. So an interesting example, I was giving a presentation in Winchester, Virginia to about 100, 150 people in this auditorium. And I had gone through that presentation a number of times, so I knew it, even if I was cold. And all of a sudden, a man leaped up onto the stage. I was down front on a stage, and he leaped up, and that startled me. And he got really close to me. Now, quickly, I realized he had a professional-looking camera, so he was probably with the press. or probably with the library where I was presenting. Turns out in hindsight, he was with the local newspaper, and an article ran about my event the next day. And so that's what he was doing. He was making a photograph with me, but it startled me. It startled the audience. I mean, there were faces in the audience like, who's that guy? Why did he just jump up on stage with her? But it didn't matter because I'd been over this presentation so many times. I just kept rolling with it and didn't let that, I didn't have to stop and ask the guy, who are you and what are you doing? I just kept going. So if you put the homework in ahead of time and you practice, things like, the unexpected that naturally will happen in everything that you do ever, the unexpected is not going to throw you off.
And we've got students who are rounding the corner and preparing to end session B or end their fall semester, and they're getting ready to give those presentations. And so that's a good point. It's muscle memory, right? The more times you can get it out from your larynx to your tongue, you do it over and over and over. It's just like weightlifting. Your body remembers, and so you're able to recover quickly. And I think that is really how the soft skills work too. That it's going to be uncomfortable the first few times you do it. It's going to be awkward. You're going to have to get vulnerable. You're going to have to get self-reflective, and you're going to have to take the time to think about how you can improve. But if you do that work, this work will do incredible things for you. Those soft skills will open up doors. They will facilitate connections. They will increase clarity, transparency, and I think they'll lead to a better work life. So I don't think that we can overhype their importance. And I appreciate tonight, Alison, how you've been very real with us, and you've given us simple but really effective and insightful examples from your professional career on how these soft skills really do matter. And I appreciate your time. It's great chatting with you here. Do you have any final thoughts before we turn it over to our great hosts?
I hope all of you all are hanging in there in this pandemic. That it's hard, and I imagine this semester right now is hard, and I don't know where you all are in it, if you've had midterms yet or not, if there's papers coming due. I hope you all are hanging in there. This too will pass. Just like every hard thing, you feel like it's never going to end and things are never going to go back to normal, but they definitely will, and you will look back on this. I frankly think this class is going to be an interesting class to watch because you all have done something that I think, in my opinion, is harder than what other professionals have done. And I include the faculty like Phil in that. You took an experience that is naturally in person, that's naturally group oriented with classrooms and social events and football games, and you've had to take it online on a dime. I mean, if somebody had told you a year ago that you have to do this immediately, everybody would have come up with all these reasons why that just wasn't possible, but you've done it and you're doing it right now. I really think you all are going to be a group that's going to approach challenges and problems in your careers very differently from people who are a few years ahead of you or a few years behind you because their experience isn't the same. I mean, my audit job was never much of a desk job because we were always out at client sites. But really, when you strip that away, it is, I mean, yeah, we can move and do our work from home, especially when KPMG went paperless more than 10 years ago. Thank God, that made that possible. And so that transition to home, that does have its challenges. It's not the same as a master's degree and your college education and putting that online. So I really am going to be excited to see what this class is going to achieve when challenges come your way, because I think you're going to approach them differently. I think less is going to shock you. I think less is going to phase, things just aren't going to phase you, I think, the way that they may still phase people even just a few years ahead of you who already graduated and started their careers in this environment. I don't think that that's the same. So if I can give you guys a vote of confidence, I'll be looking for the class of 2021 to see what you all achieve.
If I can second your vote of confidence, the class of 2021 is filled with rock stars who have just been exceptionally agile and really maximize the moment. And I agree with you. This uncomfortable time is going to situate people, I think, to thrive, because when life does, fingers crossed, get back to normal, look at all that we've overcome. We've been able to develop some semblance of normal now. Imagine what we'll be able to maximize when the hurdles are gone. So I think the soft skills are a great vehicle to help us do that. Alison, I really appreciate your time. It has been a great conversation, a great evening. Midori and Jonathan, I want to make sure that we turn it back over to you in case you have any final thoughts. Thank you to everybody who tuned in tonight. It's been great chatting with you.
Good questions too.
Thanks, Phil. I'm trying to get online here. Thank you so much, Alison and Phil, for the webinar tonight. It was great. We really appreciate you taking your time, your important and valuable time to contribute tonight. And I'm sure I want to thank the attendees for coming as well, and thank them for their questions. The webinar, just a reminder, actually, here we go, was sponsored by the William & Mary Master of Accounting program. I'm Jonathan Schramm. I'm the Director of Admissions for the MAcc program, and you met Midori earlier on, who introduced Allison and Phil. And we're going to stick around. If anybody has any questions about the MAcc program, we're happy to answer those. And if not, you're free to go at this stage. If you do have questions but can't stick around, feel free to email us. And thanks again for coming. We sincerely appreciate it.